Our next topic is measuring biological aging.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to give you two simple tests you could do in your office to see how healthy you are. And I need two volunteers. Anyone want to volunteer for a test? Okay, one, okay, not right now, but, and Elliot? All right. So I'll ask you to come up a little later. So you can ask your patients you should ask yourself, what is your resting heart rate? Most of my patients have no idea what their resting heart rate is. I know because actually I wear this Garmin watch. My son goes, why don't you get a fancy watch? And it's like, no, I need to know what my 1 week, 1 month, 1 year heart rate is. It gives me so much in REM sleep. I love these wearable devices. To me, I think data is more important than having a fancy watch. But anyway, Lance Armstrong apparently had a resting heart rate of 32. Usain Bolt, one of the fastest guys in the world, had a resting heart rate of 33. Michael Phelps, one of the fastest swimmers in the world, 38 beats per minute. The world record was Martin Brady. He was born 1969. I don't think he's an athlete, but he had a resting heart rate of 27, and that was a Guinness World Record. So lifespan is inversely related to resting heart rate. If your heart rate is lower, you will live longer. There's study after study after study, and I didn't want to go through all the studies on this, but I'll just point out like one study on it. But the best way is to wear a wearable device, and it can download to your phone, and you'll know exactly what your resting heart rate is. Raise your hand if you know your resting heart rate. Okay, few. All right, very good. So here's a study, 2019, 21-year prospective study was done overseas in Europe, and they basically looked at cardiovascular events in 50-year-old men. And it was a random population sample of men born in 1943 who were living in Sweden and followed for 21 years. And the bottom line is that men who had a heart rate less than 55 basically lived longer, had less heart disease and other morbidities. So the thing is that if your heart rate's 70 in the morning, that's not good. There's not much literature in women. It's just basically men. Unfortunately, they need more data for women. But it should be the same thing. That's so how can you lower it? You could do yoga. I love deep breathing exercises. I tell my patients, you're super stressed. Close your eyes. Always breathe through your nose. Breathe in. Hold it for 4 seconds, 5 seconds, and then exhale. You can exhale through your mouth. And then when you completely exhale, hold for 4 or 5 seconds and repeat the cycle, and just do it 4 times. I do it before I sleep. I do it before my next patient. So anyway, I do it a lot. And the key really is a lot of people, they're so busy, they don't have time to work out. You gotta do cardio. You gotta get, it's cool that you could do, weights, but you gotta get some high intensity interval workouts there to get that heart rate up, and it's the more cardio you do, generally you have a lower heart rate. Stress reduction, underwater breath holding. Frank Sinatra basically used to do this to basically to become a better singer, because everything in singing is on the exhalation, and the larger lung capacity you have, the better singer you'll be. You can belt out that note longer. So I'm going to show you a slide on, after I did this, it's not in your slide deck here, that you can lower your heart rate by holding your breath underwater. Taping your mouth at night, bedtime, there's a wonderful book by Breath. I've read the book 7 times. Try to get 2 hours of REM sleep. By wearing a wearable device. Before taping my mouth, it was 45 minutes. Now I'm getting an average of 2 hours. And some people need counseling. So this is, I'm fortunate, I have a little pool, splash pool in my backyard. I live in Orlando. And it was a time, it was like, I wanted to work out, but I couldn't get to the pool because of the 5 o'clock traffic. And I didn't really have much time because we had to do something. So I just jumped in the pool. And you can see my heart rate. It's like, average is 58, but it can go up to like, 60, 70. And then I held my breath for like 30 seconds, and it just basically brought it down. And then the second one I held for 40 seconds, third I held 45, and then a minute, and then a minute 10, and a minute 20. And my heart rate, it's amazing. It got down to 37, just basically holding your breath. And you really need to get that carbon dioxide receptors reset. So you can get that heart rate down. You can train it. I mean, there are a group of women in South Korea. They're called, English basically is Jeju, the island Jeju-do, but Jeju divers. These women are all over 60 these days, but they started young. They can hold their breath for over 2 minutes to collect seaweed and shellfish. And they do it all year long. So their longevity has been shown to be up there. So, and their heart rate's much lower. So let's get to 2 volunteers up here. Let's give a hand. All right, they're going to do this sit to rise test. So you can have a seat here, and I'll kind of explain this test. This study was done in Brazil. There's published data on this, and if your score is between 8 to 10, you live longer versus someone who has a score of 0 to 3. So it's basically that you have to cross your legs and then bend down to the ground. And with that, if you touch the ground with your hands or you use your elbow or something like that, you have to subtract a point. It's getting up is the hardest thing. So anyway, I'm a 9 out of 10 because if I'm sitting, I need that one push with my hand. But anyway, so let's have one person here and one person here, so you can both say you can stand up. If you want to take off your shoes, that's fine, but you can just cross your legs, and if you want to put your hands straight out. All right, so you can bend down, and all the way down until you sit down. That's it. So he didn't touch his hands on the ground, so he had 5 points. Okay, now stand up. Whoa! I didn't see you, Elliot. Okay. So if you use the hand or elbow or a knee, you take a point off each. But thank you very much. Boy, yeah, likewise. That's great. That's awesome. So you could do this at home. You can ask your patients to do this because as they get older, if they fall down, they're not going to get up. And if you can't get up to call, then everything falls apart. So it's your mobility that's really being tested. It's a simple test. Doesn't cost anything. You could do it in your office. So it's a simple sit to rise test. By the way, cultures, a lot of different cultures, they sit not on the, they sit on the floor. They don't sit on the table. So that's where they always eat. So my wife has grown up in Korea, and she cannot stand up without using her hand too. But she sat down all her life on the floor. So this is I remember high school. I was traumatized in high school because every woman rejected me. Every time I asked them to go out, they said, I would rather go to a Tupperware party than to go out with you. But I remember this woman named Carol. This is not Carol. So gorgeous, so pretty, tall. And I remember going to a 10th year high school reunion. And I didn't know this in medical, because I was in residency, internal medicine. And I kept looking at Carol and said, what has happened to you? I mean, I didn't say that, but I'm thinking, like, what, you were just 10 years ago, just like gorgeous. So here's Carol 10 years later. So I didn't get taught in medical school why we age like this. So that's like, I've been thinking about that. So since Carol, at 10th year high school reunion, it's been in my back of my head. And there's over 300 reasons why we age. It's multiple things, but mitochondrial dysfunction, insufficient cell communication, that's like with exosomes, stem cells exhaustion, but proteins becoming less functional, depletion of NAD, immune cell dysfunction, failed autophagy. And one thing that has really opened my eyes was the book by Dr. David Sinclair. He wrote the book called Lifespan, and he basically, he did research in yeast, and he really looked at the pathway of why we age, because he wanted to look at a simple species, because humans are really too complicated. So if you can understand in simple species, you can take it on to the next step. But he basically coined the phrase that aging is the mother of all diseases. Now, we always think that, yes, we get older, but aging is a medical condition. We should be approaching, we should not think it's just heart disease and diabetes and blood pressure. We should think aging is really a category of all the diseases. And it's linked to senescence. So I'm going to take you down this rabbit hole with aging, senescence, and then epigenetics, and then biological testing. So we're going to go down this pathway. So I want to explain that aging and senescence are really related. This term has been defined by Dr. Hayflick over 60 years ago in 1961. He says that our cells have a limited number of cell cycles, and then it stops. So our skin cells will constantly replace itself, and eventually it's not going to replace itself. So senescence is basically there's a couple of definitions of senescence. You kind of need all three. It's an inability for a cell to divide. We do have some cells that do not divide at all. Does anyone know what cells that is in your body? It's your neurons. So our cells, because they don't have the they can't divide anyway. So, but senescence also, senescent cells also release something called SAP, which basically it's a lot of inflammation, and then their resistance to apoptosis. So they don't want to die. So there's a tipping point in our body where we're young, we're healthy, and then all of a sudden we just tend to fall apart. So, and that's where you accumulate all these bad cells. So I tell my patients, think of senescent cells as zombie cells, because these cells do not die. They basically release a lot of inflammation, and they accumulate any part of your body, you're going to get any kind of condition. And that is really the definition of aging, is this accumulation of these bad cells. So the dark side of senescence is if you have too much of these, they basically can cause local inflammation and influence your local healthy tissue they can get sick, or they can form into a tumor, to a cancer. So it's really accumulation of senescent cells. Now we need senescent cells. It is beneficial, especially when we're young. It's for tissue regeneration, embryonic development, wound healing, tumor suppression. But if you have too much, then you have chronic inflammation, tissue degeneration, and tumor promotion. So there's a balance. You do need a little, but if you have too much, then you rapidly age, that tipping point. So it's always, nature is really, really amazing. The more we study about it, the more I'm just truly blown away. So these senescent cells, or zombie cells, they're resistant. They don't want to die. They're a bad apple in the group, and they know they're a bad apple, and their immune system's supposed to take it out, but they don't want to be taken out. So basically they have this protective way. And it's kind of interesting. They're like cancer cells. They do not want to die. So they have all these pathways that they become resistant to apoptosis. They secrete all these pathways to basically to stay alive. So in a rat study in 2017, there's really no universal marker of senescence. You need tissue. There's no real universal blood marker, so you need tissue. But in young mice, there were about 1% of the cells in any given organ were senescent. In 2 years, basically 20% of the cells were senescent in some organs. By the way, rodents generally live up to 2 years. That's their lifespan. So from stem cells to senescent cells, when we're born, we have tons of stem cells. As we get older, we have less stem cells and more senescent cells. So, and if you accumulate too much of these senescent cells or zombie cells in the brain, you can have neurodegenerative disease, you can have Alzheimer's, you can have basically Parkinson's, and if you're whatever condition, you can basically PubMed whatever medical condition you're dealing with and type in senescence, and you'll see hundreds of articles associated with it. So anyway, it's in the literature there. So why your DNA isn't your destiny. This is a brand new science, and this is really exciting. It's really epigenetics. So epigenetics is really our environmental influence or toxins that can turn on or turn off gene expression. So we have our genes. Everyone has their genes. We do have some SNPs, but anyway, we have environmental toxins, and the more toxins we're exposed, it can turn on and turn off bad genes. Next week, I'm going to a living ceremony to a friend of mine who's 52, and unfortunately, he died with stage 4 esophageal cancer. And he didn't smoke, didn't drink. It's just that 3 months before he was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer, he went through chemo and radiation, and just chemo, and it didn't work. And I remember talking up to the day he passed away. So it's really sad. So cancer did not start like 3 months before he got diagnosed. This started 20, 30 years ago. And it could be in the water. It could be, anything exposed that could turn on his cancer-promoting genes or turn off his protection gene. P53 is a really important protection gene. Unfortunately, we only have one copy of P53 gene. You know how many copies elephants have? 200? I heard 53. I haven't verified, but they have a lot. They rarely get cancer. So here's a cartoon blaming the epigenetics there. It's environmental toxin turning on his fat ice cream turning on his fat gene, and boom, you got fat. So there's tons of environmental causes, and the thing is, it can methylate our DNA, and it can basically turn on, turn off genes. So this is really an important point, because I tell my patients, when you're born, in theory, you have really no junk on your DNA. And then when you get older, you accumulate a lot of junk on your DNA. And we call this, there's certain parts of your DNA that gets methylated or has junk on it. And these are basically the promotion sites where the gene gets expressed. So as we age, we have those sites, they accumulate more junk on it. So we can actually measure that. So there is a difference between genetics versus epigenetics. Some people are thinking, what's the difference? If you think, let's say the Bible, all the words in the Bible is your DNA, that's your genetics. But if you take a lot of notes and sticky notes and put it on each page, that's your epigenetics. So it's harder you have tons of these little sticky notes, and it's hard to go through that Bible or that book because there's so much junk on it. So that's epigenetics. It's what's on top of your DNA. We're not measuring your DNA, your actually DNA sequence or your DNA sequencing. We're actually looking at how much junk you have on your DNA. So epigenetics, just want to tell you there's 4 nucleic acids. If you remember medical school, it's A, T, C, G. A and T combines and C and G combines, so that's adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, and you have a methyl group that basically can connect to the nucleic acid cytosine, and you get the 5-methyl cytosine. So this is different from, because I get this all the time, I have a MTHFR SNP, and that is totally different. That deals with homocysteine breakdown. When I talk about methylation on the DNA, that has nothing to do with that homocysteine breakdown. So you can have you can have a MTHFR defect, but you will also have issues, I mean, we all have methylation on our DNA. They're two different categories. So here's another kind of diagram or a picture. And if you have a lot of junk in front of your gene promoter region, and the dark circles are basically the methylation, you turn off the gene expression. So you could see that this right here, if you have more methylated groups in front of this gene, you turn off or repress the gene. So on this side here, oops, I went backwards. So yeah, right here, you have too much of the garbage or DNA, garbage in your DNA or methylation in front of your gene, it does not get expressed and it's repressed. So if you have, let's say, this is your P53 gene, that if you have early tumor, it can get rid of it, and you have too much methylation in front of that, it's not going to work well. So epigenetics, I could spend a whole hour speaking on this, on the different sciences. It's really cool. We have 28 million CPG sites on our DNA, and basically it's really turning off or turning on the gene. So epigenetic clocks have been used in forensic science. So they find a dead body on the beach or behind a let's say a restaurant or something like that. They don't know how old the body is, or they dig it up. They can use basically epigenetics to figure out their age. But what we're looking at is more the biological, epigenetic, what can be used clinically. So I'm going to talk about biological age, disease prediction, and rate of aging. There are 3 different clocks. I'll just kind of quickly go over it. I don't want to go too heavy into it, but the first generation clock was really Dr. Horvath and Dr. Hannum, but there's so much proof on the validity of epigenetic clocks that it can predict all-cause of mortality, it can predict cancer, it can predict cardiovascular, it can predict mortality. I actually do 2 tests in my office. All my patients get basically their biological age in my office. If you're a new patient, you don't need, if you get the package, you get all this done. But I also do a flow cytometry looking at CD4, CD8 count on a separate blood test. But the test that does this epigenetics, your biological age, can also give your immune status. And they can actually look at the methylation and give a prediction what your CD4, CD8 count, and it's very close to flow cytometry. So I'm going to stop the flow cytometry because I've seen like 100 results. They're like right on the money. So it's a really good way to, this epigenetics will tell you if you're a male, female, if you smoke, if you drink, without even knowing your history. You could say whatever you want. Say, I don't smoke, I don't drink. And then you go, well, let's sit down and let's look at this data. So it can be basically the truth buster there. So Dr. Horvath is in 2013, he's at UCLA. He did this amazing pan-tissue clock that no one will ever repeat. But to me, it's like blew my mind, because when I read this, it's like, how can you do this? So he studied all nucleated cells, tissue, and organs. So he got samples from around the country and outside the US, and he got basically frontal cortex, he got the cerebellum, he got the pons, he got the retina, and I was like, how do you get tissues from that? And then I was reading the paper, and it's like, oh, these people were dead. So anyway, so he got all these tissues and looked at their genetics and epigenetics, and they looked at, measured 27,000 CPG sites in their DNA, and spanning over close to 15,000 genes. So he basically reduced it to 353 sites on your DNA where methylation occurs, and you can basically look at your biological age. Now, you'll get 2 readings, intrinsic age and extrinsic age. It's not that complicated, but everyone who speaks, like I was in a meeting in Denver, and some of the speakers got this wrong. Intrinsic age is not like how young you are inside, and extrinsic, how the environmental, what the environment throws at you. It does not mean that. Intrinsic basically looks at, if you look at your immune system, if you have autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, you're going to have different subsets of your immune system activated. So they're going to be off. So if you look at the general population, you're going to have more, like say, basophils or more eosinophils, and just compared to the normal population. Dr. Horvath basically said we have to control for that, because let's just basically control for that, because it's not fair. Because when you measure your blood, you're looking at the white blood cells. That's what they're doing. They're looking at your epigenetics of your white blood cells. So, and the thing is that Dr. Hannum, a different guy, goes, no, it should be basically don't control. So there's the debate, do you control or not control? So when you control, basically it's intrinsic age, and most people in this, if you're I hate to say anti-aging, but we're in the first advanced anti-aging conference, but I believe it's age management, but anyway, it should be basically your intrinsic age. So the second generation predicts disease, and basically they can tell you if you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke. The third generation is really cool. This is called the Dunedin. I'm not quite sure how to say it. It's like tomato. Is it Dunedin or Dunedin? But anyway, it's in New Zealand, and they just celebrated their 50th anniversary for the study. So this study started more than 50 years ago, and it wasn't intended to go this long. It was actually, they eventually got the rate of aging, but it wasn't initially for that study. It's a small little town, 120,000 people. In 1972, they decided to study their pediatric, all the babies, and just see what would happen to them. They just want to get data from New Zealand, their children. Are they going to have a little more issues with, having psychiatric issues or... So this study started in 1972. They enrolled over 1,000 children, and the whole town contributed in the study. Everyone contributed. The nurses gave their free time. Doctors donated their free times. They were there for a whole day for examinations. They would say, please have the dad skip work so they can bring their children to basically enroll in the study. So the whole community was very open. They really wanted to participate in this study. So they have the best data. And eventually, people would move. But most people who lived in New Zealand stay in New Zealand. There's 10% that moved to Australia, and then there was a few percent that went outside, they got married and they went out. But people, even who went to jail, were allowed to come back to continue with the study because they really wanted this data. So this is really, it will never be repeated, this study. But they did blood work at 26, 32, and 38, and they went back and forth and look at their progression, who had basically, COPD, who developed diabetes, who developed this condition, and they can go back and forth and look at their epigenetics and clinical correlation, and they can actually look at the rate of aging. So this is truly amazing. They looked at 400,000 CPG sites, identified 46 areas. So this algorithm has been verified by 3 large long-term studies. So they actually plugged it into their they got samples from all these large studies that's been out there, and shows that it's validated. So the thing is, are you aging faster, or are you aging like a rabbit, which is not good, or are you aging like a turtle? This data will tell you. So there are so many DNA methylation clocks, or epigenetic clocks. There's online and all that. There's blood versus saliva versus multi-tissue. You're not going to get multi-tissue, trust me. Right? That was a once-in-time study done. But how many CPG sites are used? There are a lot of things on the internet that basically, hey, we do epigenetic studies, or YouTube videos. They talk about it. Hey, my epigenetic age got younger. But what clocks did you actually use? And some of these clocks are not published data. It's just like proprietary. It's like we picked certain CPGs. So it has to be validated. You have to know. So there is, I try not to be non-commercial, but I use a company called True Diagnostic, and there's her contact information if you're interested in using that. So can we reverse biological aging? The answer is yes. With this Dunedin poem, The Rate of Aging, they actually had a study in basically caloric restriction. It's a 2-year study, and 128 people, they had to reduce their calories by 25% from baseline. And then they had 69 patients that can basically, it was a placebo group. This was tough. They knew it was going to be tough. So they had counselors, they had dietitians, they visited, they cooked for them, they basically showed them this is what your diet is going to be. So they had 24 weeks of weekly counseling, first 3 months. First month, 3 meals per day were provided to see how portion size was. And by the first year, you had to lose 15% of your weight. So you can say, yeah, I'm in the study, but if you're not losing weight, you're not doing it correctly. So it actually showed that you slow down the rate of aging by eating less. So this is also Dr. Horvath, but he was involved with studies. The lead author is Dr. Fahey. I emailed him several times. And they did a study from UCLA that looked at DHEA, metformin, and human growth hormone. And this actually showed that it reversed epigenetic aging. And they talked about the thymus gland, how the thymus gland atrophies and gets weak. And then there's something called the T-cell receptor repertoire in humans, and there's a decrease in this T-cell receptor sites, increase the risk of cancer, infection, all-cause and mortality. And as opposed to centenarians, they have a healthier immune system. So they did a study called the TRIM trial, and they basically wanted to see if the thymus glands regenerates. So this is exciting. So they did it's a small study, only in men, and they're doing a second part of the study, but anyway, one subject dropped out because due to self-reported bradycardia, he turned out to be all right. But what's interesting is, look at the thymus gland. The thymus gland here is filled with fat. And then over time, in 9 months, you can see the fat that has been replaced with normal thymic tissue. So the 7 out of 9 has significant improvement of their thymus gland with MRIs, which was really interesting. 2 out of 9 had very low fat in their thymus gland initially. So that's actually good if you have low fat. If you have too much fat, then that's been replaced. So anyway, they said out of the 2 out of 9, there was improvement, but in having less fat. So, but it was not statistically significant. So they use high-dose growth hormone, and this, I was just calculating in my head, they're probably using close to like $500, $700 a month in using growth hormone for this trial. They were using a dose of 0.015 milligram per kilogram, bedtime 3 or 4 times a week, DHEA 50 milligrams, metformin 500. The reason they're using metformin and DHEA is there's an issue with possibly growth hormone causing insulin resistance, so they want to counteract with DHEA and metformin. DHEA and metformin had nothing to do with the thymus gland. They just wanted to counteract with a potential side effect of basically insulin resistance or blood sugars going up with this study. But if the data looking at growth hormone and causing glucose to go up and down, it's 50-50. Data shows it does, other data says it doesn't. So we're not quite sure if it does. So, and all subjects basically took vitamin D and basically zinc. So they had improvement in their immune system. So not only the thymus gland looked better, but on blood work, their lymphocytes, basically monocytes ratio improved. So they also looked at epigenetics, and they were shown that the epigenetic clock actually improved there too. So if the thymus gland gets better, their immune system got better, and they had basically, I tell my patients, try to get less trash off your DNA. So I did a study. It's not published yet. Not quite sure when. It's basically written. We're just waiting. But we're looking at, we had 21 patients enrolled in our study. They were taking 50 milligrams of dasatinib and 500 milligrams of quercetin 3 days in a row per month for 6 months. So for example, like say December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, you take it. And then January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So that's the way we took it. So anyway, they took it for 6 months, and Dasatinib is it's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. It is a cancer drug. It is used for like CLL. So you have to, it's in combination with quercetin, it actually kills the senescent cells. So there's data out there, small clinical trials. I wanted to extend it. If this gets published, it'll be the largest study on humans for this long. So dasatinib basically is a second generation small molecule. It's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. And it basically blocks all the pathway where these senescent cells want to escape. But in combination with quercetin, it basically kills the zombie cells. By itself, it doesn't. Quercetin by itself does not take away these senescent cells. You have to use in combination. It doesn't work. It's like you need two to work together. It's like you need a man and a female to make a baby. So, you know. Anyway, here's my data, and no one aged. That's the bottom line. Statistically, we didn't get statistical significance, but let me just show you my data here. In November 2020, my biological age was older than my chronological age. I was 57 by biological age. I was 55 in that study, and then that was November 2020, and then in May of 2021, I dropped close to 3.5 years, which is a big drop. No one in our study aged. Everyone basically either remained the same, they didn't advance, because 6 months later, you're going to go 6 months. No one advanced. We had a couple people who dropped out of the study. One was diagnosed with prostate cancer, 3rd month in the study. He begged to be in it. I said, you're out. 2 other people kind of had a panic attack. I don't want this cancer drug, so they stopped. But they did come back at 6 months, and they even dropped in biological age. Now, question is, how long do you do it? More than 6 months? No one knows. I did have one patient, not in the trial, did it for 2 years, and his age really went up. So I think taking too much is bad. I think we have to cycle it. It's too early to kind of see where we're at, but in terms of reducing biological age, I can tell you I'm doing it. I'm doing a second part of a study, so I'm actually, the patients that we're in, most of them are doing a second phase of it, so we took a year off, and then we're going to basically, we're in the process of doing it. So I have another study involved. So in review of the epigenetic clock, the 1st generation clock looks at your biological age, 2nd predicts diseases, 3rd rate of aging. Keep it down. So senescence is the major cause of aging. Epigenetic clock basically can really tell you how your true age, your cellular age, and also the rate of aging. There's ways to improve it. And anyway, you saw the data in 6 months of the quercetin and dasatinib. I don't think anyone from Puerto Rico is going to go to Phoenix, but if you happen to have a relative or friends, if you want to learn more about naltrexone and peptides, Luis Martinez and I were both giving a talk out there. So, and that's it. So thank you very much.